Picture a quiet wooded park on Long Island, New York, where four young men vanish on a spring day in 2017. Their bodies later discovered, brutally hacked apart with machetes. This was no random crime. It was the handiwork of MS-13, the transnational Salvadoran gang infamous for its savagery. At the center, Omar Antonio Villalta, alias Anticristo, Antichrist, a high-ranking member of the Guanacos Lil Psychos Salvatruchas clique. This is the story of how justice finally caught up with one of MS-13's most brutal killers. I'll walk you through the chilling details of the murders, the painstaking investigation across states, the gang's structure and operations, the victims whose lives were stolen, and how the long arc of justice bent toward final resolution. It's gruesome, it's tragic, and it's also an important lesson in law enforcement perseverance. Let's dive in. Background and gang structure. MS-13, or Mara Salvatrucha, began among Salvadoran immigrants in Los Angeles and developed into a loosely organized but deeply violent transnational gang operating across the United States and Central America. Its internal system is organized around local cliques, such as Guanacos Lil Psychos Salvatruchas, with identity deeply tied to retaliatory violence and territorial control. Members often identify with a set of rules rooted in a culture of blood loyalty and violent enforcement. Discipline is supposedly enforced from Salvadoran prison leadership, though in practice it varies across U.S. cliques, a reason MS-13 remains decentralized but ferocious. Violence is part of the group's DNA, a method of cohesion, control, and terror, used both against perceived rivals and within its own ranks. Anticristo, whose moniker invoked dread even among his peers, epitomized this ethos. He was known as a man who distributed machetes, knives, and clubs, and personally ordered killings under the belief that the victims had disrespected or belonged to a rival MS-13 clique. His reputation for ruthlessness and his willingness to enforce gang discipline with blood cemented his status among the Guanacos Lil Psychos. The murders. On April 11, 2017, four young men, Michael Lopez, age 20, Justin Livicura, age 16, Jorge Tigre, age 18, and Jefferson Villalobos, age 18, were lured into a wooded section of a central Long Island park near Central Islip under false pretenses. Two female MS-13 associates enticed them there, allegedly invoking a social media post that was believed to mock the gang. The victims believed they were meeting friends, unaware that a death squad was waiting. Hidden in the trees, Anticristo and other armed gang members lay in wait. Weapons in hand, machetes, knives, and clubs made from tree limbs, they sprang their ambush. The attack was swift, savage, and unrelenting. The victims were hacked to death in a frenzy of violence, stripped of dignity, and left in a tangled heap on the forest floor. Their bodies were concealed but later discovered, horrifyingly mutilated, in a scene that would haunt investigators and the community for years. In the days following the massacre, Villalta fled New York. He traveled south to Charlottesville, Virginia, seeking refuge among MS-13 associates and hoping to evade detection. But the pattern of violence did not end there. Less than 3 months later, on July 3, 2017, he committed a fifth killing. The victim, Marvin Rivera Guevara, was lured under the pretense of meeting women and obtaining drugs. Once secluded, he was forced into the woods and killed with the same ruthless methods that had defined the earlier massacre. His body was thrown off a bridge into a river, completing a sequence of killings that placed Anticristo among the most violent figures in MS-13's history. Victim impact and public response. The murders devastated families and shattered the sense of safety in Suffolk County. At a memorial service for Justin Livicura, his mother clasped flowers and a crucifix, her grief uncontainable as she mourned the youngest victim, just 16 years old and still in high school. Friends described him as a bright, ambitious teenager with a love of soccer and dreams of attending college. For Michael Lopez's parents, the news arrived like a thunderbolt. They struggled to comprehend how their son could be slaughtered in such a senseless and brutal way. Jorge Tigre's family described him as a protective older brother who had only recently celebrated his 18th birthday. Jefferson Villalobos had come to the United States seeking safety and opportunity, only to become another casualty of the gang's reign of terror. Communities across Suffolk County reeled. Between January 2016 and May 2017, MS-13 had been linked to 17 of 45 homicides locally, transforming once quiet neighborhoods into flashpoints of fear. Vigils were held, and crowds gathered at makeshift memorials demanding justice and answers. Public outrage intensified as details emerged. 4 young men ambushed in a park, killed over perceived disrespect expressed on social media, their lives extinguished as a demonstration of gang dominance. Media coverage described the incident as a savage quadruple machete massacre, an attack that stripped away any lingering illusions that MS-13's violence was confined to distant urban centers. Residents began locking doors earlier, and parents forbade children from walking home alone. The killings became a symbol of the gang's grip on local communities and the urgent need for decisive law enforcement action. Investigation and law enforcement. The investigation that followed was painstaking and relied on the cooperation of multiple agencies, including local police in Suffolk County, the FBI, and the U.S. Department of Justice. Detectives painstakingly pieced together a web of evidence through witness statements, forensic analysis, and digital records that revealed the luring scheme. Investigators worked their way into the inner circle of the Guanacos Lil Sicos Salvatruchas clique, eventually identifying over a dozen participants in the April massacre. Cooperation from former gang members, who faced lengthy sentences of their own, proved critical in reconstructing the events of that night. By 2018, investigators had linked Villalta directly to both the Long Island massacre and the Charlottesville killing. His movements were tracked through phone records, social media activity, and testimony from co-conspirators. In March 2023, after years of evidence gathering and pre-trial proceedings, Omar Villalta pled guilty to racketeering charges that encompassed murder and conspiracy, admitting his involvement in all 5 killings. The plea deal marked a turning point in the broader effort to dismantle MS-13's presence on the East Coast. Federal prosecutors emphasized the importance of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, in connecting multiple murders, conspiracies, and luring actions as part of an ongoing criminal enterprise, enabling them to secure convictions that might otherwise have proved elusive. Hey, if you're finding this story compelling and want more coverage of true crime and justice served, go ahead and subscribe and like. It really helps bring more awareness to stories like this. Sentencing and legal outcome. On May 7, 2025, at the federal courthouse in Central Islip, Judge Gary R. Brown handed down a sentence of 55 years in prison for Omar Villalta. The length of the sentence reflected not only the sheer brutality of his crimes, but also his leadership role in orchestrating 2 separate massacres across state lines. Prosecutors described him as both judge and executioner, a man who wielded violence as both a weapon and a message. FBI officials highlighted the sentence as emblematic of MS-13's gruesome tactics and total disregard for human life. The verdict brought closure to a case that had haunted Suffolk County for 8 long years. Villalta's sentencing came 2 years after his guilty plea, and made him the 6th person convicted in connection with the April 2017 massacre. Other perpetrators had already faced justice, including Lenis Escobar, known by the nickname Diablita or Little Devil, who had been sentenced to 50 years for luring the victims to their deaths. Escobar was convicted in 2022 of racketeering and murder in aid of racketeering, her sentence reflecting her pivotal role in setting the deadly trap. Together, these sentences underscored a coordinated law enforcement effort to prosecute multiple actors within the same criminal enterprise and dismantle a clique responsible for terrorizing communities. Broader context and significance. The Anticristo case illuminated the full spectrum of MS-13's brutality and provided an object lesson in the power of persistent, coordinated law enforcement. MS-13 thrives on its reputation for spectacular violence, often wielding machetes and clubs as both instruments of death and symbols of terror. By murdering in public and leaving behind scenes of unrestrained carnage, the gang seeks to enforce control not just over its own members, but also over entire communities living in fear of reprisal. This case also demonstrated the power of RICO statutes in connecting individual acts of violence into a broader narrative of organized criminal activity. By framing the murders as part of a racketeering enterprise, prosecutors were able to hold leaders like Villalta accountable not only for the blood on their hands, but for the culture of violence they cultivated. Cross-jurisdictional cooperation proved vital, with local police, FBI task forces, federal prosecutors, and even immigration authorities coordinating efforts to locate, apprehend, and prosecute Anticristo. The sentencing came amid a wave of anti-gang initiatives across the United States, as law enforcement agencies redoubled their efforts to dismantle MS-13 cells. Beyond U.S. borders, El Salvador was conducting its own sweeping crackdown on MS-13, arresting tens of thousands of suspected gang members and constructing a terrorism confinement center to hold them. American authorities have designated MS-13 as a foreign terrorist organization, a recognition of the gang's extraordinary reach and the threat it poses to national security. The Anticristo case became a touchstone, illustrating both the gang's unflinching capacity for violence and the relentless determination of law enforcement to bring its members to justice. The story of MS-13's Anticristo is one of profound loss and relentless justice. 5 young lives were brutally taken, 4 in a Long Island park, 1 in Virginia, all victims of calculated gang violence. But after years of investigation, cooperation across state lines, and key guilty pleas, justice was delivered. Omar Villalta was sentenced to 55 years. Accomplice Lenis Escobar received 50. Others have also been convicted or remain behind bars. For grieving families, the pain endures, but there is some closure in knowing those responsible have been held accountable. This case is both a chilling warning and a powerful reminder. Even the most violent gang members can be found, prosecuted, and punished. Justice, though delayed, was not denied. If you found this investigation intriguing and insightful, don't forget to subscribe and like, and hit that bell icon so you never miss future stories delving into true crime and the pursuit of justice. Thank you for watching and staying informed. If you have information related to these deaths, contact your local law enforcement. Awareness is the first step toward justice.